Fantastic. Can you hear me? Is this thing working? Can't really tell. Thank you very much for braving the weather on this wet October afternoon. And welcome to the, I think it's the 9th SCCS, Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity, joint with SASIG event. We've been going on for a couple of years now. We do these every quarter. We've got some online friends, which we'll introduce in a minute. And a bit of housekeeping. The fire exits are the doors you see at the back. We're not expecting any fire drills at this time. And Katie, what was the other thing you reminded me to ask? Yeah, when we leave, we go through these doors at this level, not through the main building. So some of you will have enjoyed the tour. The intent is that you don't wander back into the main building at the end of this. So the format for today, we'll do our usual format, which is we'll have our 4 invited speakers after we get an introduction from Steve on behalf of the university and Danny on behalf of SASIG. Then we'll go to our 4 speakers. We'll hear 4 presentations, and then we'll have a joint Q&A sort of panel session at the end. So the trick in this is to save your questions as you go along. So pen and paper or good memory are required just to make sure that you remember all the salient points. But it means that we get we can be even-handed with the amount of time we allocate for the questions, and it also means that we can get different views in answering those questions. And then we'll stop at the end for some networking, cups of tea, I'm assuming, and we'll go from there. And hopefully the rain will have cleared up by that. So let me start by introducing Professor Steve Schneider, the head of the Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity. Steve, you're going to say something about your group.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So where's the presentation? It's just, there's the clicker. It's not on the screen, so it's just on here. Okay, so welcome to this, as Andrew says, the ninth session. We've been doing this for about 3 years now. We started in the dark days of COVID, and it's great to be back to as we've been doing a few that are back in person. So this one on the cyber and the future of national resilience. Resilience is a big topic we're hearing a lot about, particularly at national level. So it's great that we've got 4 excellent speakers to talk about various aspects of this. I'll just introduce a little bit about what we do in the Centre for Cybersecurity, SCCS. So a new accolade. This is my general slide, but this is the first time we've been able to say Cyber University of the Year 2023. So this is something we won at the National Cyber Awards last month. So this is recent news, and we're very pleased and proud of having achieved that. As well as that recent accolade, we're an academic centre of excellence in 2 regards. One is a centre of cybersecurity research, and one in cybersecurity education. So there's actually 2 different aspects of cybersecurity, and these are recognised by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So we're one of 8 universities that has both of those accolades. In terms of the group, we have around 50 researchers. We've got a number of areas that we work in, and one that we're particularly focusing on at the moment, so that's why this topic is close to my heart, is doctoral training in resilience and security, the kind of relationship between there. And we're hoping that will to kind of turbocharge that, and we'll see in terms of the kind of scale of activity that we're doing. But this is a very important area. We also have masters that are accredited by GCHQ. We work closely with the AI Institute, People-Centered AI, and we have a number of activities outgoing as well. A network of industrial collaborators, and we're part of the cybersecurity cluster for the region of Surrey. So there's a number of cybersecurity clusters around the country. We are one of the leads in the Surrey region one. So just in terms of our application domains, the kind of areas that we focus most closely on, transport, so we're concerned about security in various aspects, privacy in transport systems, in government aspects like electronic voting, applications of distributed ledger technology, digital identity, and so on. Communications, so we're in the 5-6G building. We work closely with the team here as well, and a lot going on in secure communications and in finance, things like electronic payments, fraud detection, and so on, and hacking payment systems, and then repairing them or showing how they can be made secure. So we're involved primarily in those application domains in terms of where we have critical mass, but we're always interested in looking in new areas, and we're getting into kind of space, actually, security within space systems, satellite and satcoms and so on. So essentially, we're part of the reason for hosting these events is to meet new people and develop new collaborations. So we're always open to talk about these things, and we've got our brochure, I think, on the reception desk for anyone who would like to look into more detail about these activities. So I shall stop there. It's just a whistle-stop introduction, but this is our contact details, also in the brochure if you want to get in touch. So we'll be happy to hear from you.
Thanks, Steve. And we'll switch over to Danny of the SASIG, who's unfortunately can't join us in person, but is going to join us online, and should be able to see him now.
There we go. That helps. Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. To introduce myself, I'm Danny King, Managing Director of SASIG Events, and for the uninitiated, SASIG, the Security Awareness Special Interest Group, is a free networking forum for the cybersecurity industry. So our mission is to improve trust and confidence in the online environment. We hold regular masterclasses and networking sessions, and they are all based on topics that our many members want us to talk about. I'm delighted to say that we are growing rapidly, and we now have over 9,000 members, representing 4,000 organisations from across the UK and around the world. And as well as those responsible for cybersecurity within their organisations, we also have other professionals and representatives from government, law enforcement, and of course, academia. So just to share a few details. Hopefully you can see my screen coming up there. Lovely. So as Andrew says, today is the 9th event that we have collaborated with the Centre on, and we're especially proud of this series. It allows us to take a more academic look at various aspects of cybersecurity. And firstly, my many thanks goes to today's speakers. So we have David Hitchin at Semperis, Gary Peace, Blue Voyant, Rizwan Asghar from the university, and Professor Caroline Field at PA Consulting. My many thanks for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us today. And particularly my special thanks goes, as always, to Andrew, Steve, Katie, and everyone at the Surrey Events team. And also my big congratulations to you for your win of Cyber University of the Year. It's not a surprise at all, and I'm absolutely delighted to see all of your hard work recognised. Now, I would also like to say that I'm grateful for all of our supporters, two of whom are representative by David and Gary today, and simply we wouldn't be able to do all that we do without them. So a big thank you to all of our supporters here on screen. And SASIG produces 150 webinars each year, so 3 times a week, pretty much every Monday, Wednesday and Friday throughout the year. And we have a look at a whole variety of different subject matters. Here's a selection of some that are coming up over the next week. So this Friday, we have another of our supporters, CyberSafe. They'll be offering us an exclusive peek into their key insights from their annual report and discuss how the attitude of our workforce can impact their security behaviour. And then next Monday, we have a fresh topic lined up as Tessian demonstrates the threat of QR code phishing and how we might thwart those elusive attacks that can slip past our security. On Wednesday, lecturer Dr. Ori Igwe from the University of West London will be joining us to discuss the legal and ethical issues around the recent growth in AI use. So we'll be looking at what solutions and initiatives might lie ahead and consider if the current moral panic is justified. And then we finish next week with Jasmine Eskenzi. She'll be joining us to tackle the burnout crisis and where we learn how to identify mental ill health in the workplace. And she'll also offer us some solutions for a healthier and more productive workforce. Now, we also offer 35 other in-person events every year as well, 3 times a month, today just being one of them. And next month, we have a bump of 4 meetings taking place in London. So we start on the 7th with cybercrime and how the fight against it is crucial in making our society more resilient. It's one in which we all have a considerable stake. So we'll get to understand more about the anatomy of attacks and how to prevent them. And then later on the 9th, we have another edition of our highly popular Reaching the Boardroom series, where we take a look at how cyber leaders can successfully communicate security challenges to their boards. On the 16th, we consider the professionalization of the cybersecurity industry and look at certifications, the skills gap, and career progression. And then the following week, on Thursday, the 23rd, we have our hugely popular artificial intelligence conference. So we'll be discussing AI's implications, both good and bad, and explore how we can maximize this evolving technology to enhance our security. And a special mention for our 4th big SASIG conference taking place next year, Tuesday the 23rd of April in London. And we had our biggest crowd of the year join us for this earlier. We had earlier this year, we had 350 security professionals. So we're looking forward to it being even bigger and better than ever before for next year. You can register that for now at bigsasig.com and be the first to learn when registration formally opens next month. And you can also follow us on social media on our website, thesasig.com, on LinkedIn, and also what used to be Twitter on X. And before I hand back, just to cover a few quick house rules, if I may. The Chatham House Rule is in effect, so please do respect our speakers and our questioners and other attendees. And we ask you not to attribute what has been said back to them so that they can speak freely today. We have a great networking session, as Andrew said afterwards, for those in Guildford. So please do take that opportunity to make your 5 new friends. And today is also about learning. So we encourage everybody, both in Surrey and online, to ask questions. And if you haven't already, please do now place your phones on silent. We do welcome your feedback, and there will be a QR code on screen at the end of today's session. So if you can scan this and let us know what you thought of today, as it's only by you letting us know what you've liked that we can continue to offer it. And lastly, please do tell your colleagues, peers, and all of your cyber friends all about SASIG. Thesasig.com is where all of this is at. And before I go, as well as in the auditorium in Surrey, hello to everybody joining us online. Can I ask that in turn, you say hello to each other now in the chat function. Let us know whereabouts you're joining in from. We have the fabulous Abby from the SASIG team looking after you today. She'll also be overseeing the questions and comments that come in from our friends online so that they can be posed to today's speakers. And so, other than that, enjoy the fantastic presentations that we've got coming up. And Andrew, back to you.
Thanks, Danny. So a lot going on there in the SASIG, and I continually admire the way that, especially during the pandemic, where they switched seamlessly to online provision and delivered hundreds of online events in continuing the SASIG build and networking opportunity, kept many of us sane through those dark months. And it was actually that work that got us thinking really quite hard about resilience planning. You know, the globe has gone through some enormous challenges over the last 5 years. And we took the view that actually we needed to take a different view to how we were deploying our ideas in digital resilience, also known as cybersecurity, and actually go much broader, as much of our national infrastructure, much of our businesses, much of our civil society has become digitalized, and the vulnerabilities, but also the strengths that have been introduced on the back of that. And so we've been saving up this particular event. We've submitted a very important bid for our university creating a Centre for Doctoral Training around digital resilience, which we want to build. We're in the final stages of assessment of that. We have interviews coming shortly in about a month's time. So this topic is very, very top of our minds, and it's really interesting that we've got these 4 speakers who are going to give us hopefully some interesting and insightful views which will inform our thinking. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David from St. Paris to give us our first presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. How are we all feeling today? Awesome. He said awesome. Obviously from America, right? So, okay, so I'm Hitch. I've been in the IT industry a long time, very boring, but I was there at the beginning. So I'm going to talk to you about the single point of failure of security. And when I look at that, it's about cybersecurity. And I always think, what is cybersecurity? Everyone says, oh, it's cyber this, cyber that. There are 16 categories of cybersecurity. Things like scams, vandalism. I don't care about those. Those are mostly aimed at individuals, okay? So, you know, the phone call to your grandma, all that kind of stuff. What we're really interested in is cyber terrorism and ransomware, because that's the attacks on companies. And to be honest, they do use individuals to get to you, but that's the end point. That's your outer edge of attack. So can we guess what the single point of failure actually is? And to give you some clues, it's a critical service in every organization. So not one organization doesn't have it. It's 80% of all breaches use it. 10% use it as their main way and their simple way in. And as I say, 90% of organizations use it. It's systemically weak. It's actually a technology that's so, I like to think of it as that friend, you know, the one that gives you too much information. What did you do last night? Well, that friend, right? It is absolutely a technology that will tell you everything about it. And it hasn't been updated for a long time, but everyone uses it. So what is it?
People.
Not people, but that would be good. It is not email. I'll give you a clue. 80% of all breaches use credential abuse. Okay? Clues in the credential. It's an identity store. 10% of the breaches use an attack surface using your identity store. And 90% of organizations use Active Directory. Well done. So it is a weak problem, and almost everyone uses it. And I say it's so weak, and I talk about it's that friend and it's systemically weak, and it is, but it hasn't been updated for a long time. And even your cloud identity and things like zero trust all stem from Active Directory. Now, there is 10% of customers or companies that don't use AD, Okta and other things like that. That's fine, well done, not going to talk about that. It's still a point of entry. But if you do get attacked, this is what you're going to see. Don't know if you've ever actually seen that. This is from a real customer, by the way. And feel free to use the addresses for Bitcoin and pay some money to them if you wish. It's illegal, but yeah, you can do it. So that's what you get to see. Monday morning, you come in, that's what you get to see on your screen. You're going to panic, right? I look at that, I don't panic, because that's end user problems, okay? And we'll talk about why it's end user problems in a minute. But when we talk about, you know, how big is this problem really, lots of countries get attacked. And when we rank them, where do you think the UK comes from a rank perspective of the most attacks in the world? Second. Great, you can read. Love it. Someone actually said fourth on a presentation I did. I was like, where'd you get that? Anyway, and the reason is we're predominantly English speaking, which is a lowest common denominator. If I'm attacking you and I'm searching in your environment, I'm going to look for files called secretpasswords.txt, right? I'm not going to look for ones called Arcanum codes, because that's Latin. So different languages would cause me issues. So by using a common language, that's what we go for. I'm not going to read all this, but I thought as it's an education area I'm coming to, I would look up the education stats. 44% more attacks in education. We've passed healthcare as a target now. And in fact, MI5 released information today about how the Chinese specifically are now going on LinkedIn and trying to get people in environments such as education, especially when you're researching stuff, when you've got researchers, and there's 20,000 people have been approached so far this year. Okay, cool. So I'm protected, you think, okay? I've got Active Directory, I've got offline recovery servers, I've got backups to immutable storage. This is all stuff I hear in the field. Change control and governance around how we do things. We've got systems that handle all the management of users, and that goes to a single service account, and that is what we protect. And we've got all those edge, the users. It was yourself, wasn't it? That said users are a big problem. Well, of course they are. They're the easiest tack in. But you've got behavioral analysis and AI systems that are going to protect those users. So I have a few thoughts on that. And the first one is, if you've got backup, have you actually tried recovering Active Directory? And most organizations say, no, we haven't. We haven't actually gone through the process. And recovery of a forest is super complex. I kind of said I've been in the industry a long time. I was actually there at the beginning, so not of time, not that old, but I was on the product group for Active Directory. So I helped create it. So you can blame me for that afterwards in the panel. But the attacks that we have on it are really quite clever. They use kill chains, and I'll talk about kill chains in a minute, but they compromise your backups. So if you've got backups, they're compromised anyway. They will be infected. You can have logging systems like scenes. Don't care, I'll switch them off. I'll often talk as if I'm the attacker, which I come on stage quite a lot and do it as an actual hacker, so that's the way I talk. And attackers don't go through change control. They just make changes. And all those behavioral systems that say, oh, if you make a change, I'm going to disable your account and all that kind of stuff, doesn't matter because they've already made the change. All you're doing is thinking you'll stop the proliferation, but you're not because they've already made a change that gives them a higher level of access. And they attack with scripts and AI systems and so on. And if you've got users that are protecting your environment, so people who react to alerts, you have lost the game. And you've lost it because you can never go up against an AI or a script and work faster than they can. They are going to outgun you every time. So the other thing I like is a lot of people look at protection on Windows, but actually every Windows machine has a Linux machine built in, and it's sandbox. You can't get into it. So you've got all your antivirus and all that kind of stuff, and then I just go onto one of your machines with a credential. I'll just spin up a Linux machine on that box. You are not going to get to see what I'm doing, and I'll do whatever I feel like. And the mean time to detect, can anyone guess what the mean time to detect an attack is? Seriously? No one can? It's two months. Seriously. I write the answers on the slide so that everyone could just go, 2 months, David. Right, 2.4 months actually, but it's 2 months. Okay, so I talked about the kill chain. This is a kill chain. You know, it's a very secretive world, is the world of hackers, except it's not. It's a business. They have HR departments, they have recruitment centers, they have all sorts of things. They have CEOs that will go on the internet and say, I'm the CEO of this hacker group, and this is what we do. They advertise kill chains. This is ransomware as a service. So I could go as an attacker, go to one of these groups and say, I want to attack that company. Can you do it for me? And they go, yep, ransomware as a service, give us some money, we'll do it for you, and we'll give you all the codes that you need. That's how easy it is. And the MI5 thing that came out today means they're actually aiming for stage 4 exfiltration. They want the data. Okay? So universities and research centers specifically, they stop at stage 4. So they're not going to attack and going to encrypt and ransomware you. They're just going to keep sitting there, just taking all the data back to wherever they want and then using that. When they hit stage 5 and stage 6, they've been in a long time anyway, and there's a chance you might get your data back. If you decide to pay the company, the ransomware people, there's a whole different ball game about whether it's legal or all that kind of stuff, so, and how to do it. But we get to get involved with all these things, which is quite fun. So I kind of talked about the attackers. Who are they? So one of the big ones at the moment in the UK is Lockbit. So as I say, Lockbit is big business. It's sponsored by a government, and they have a bounty program. One of their bounties is if you can tell them the name of any of their members and their address and tell them how you did it, they will give you $1 million. Okay? Consider that compared to your security systems internally and how much you get paid to stop attackers. You don't get bounties. Right? You don't even get a budget of $1 million to even put the software in. So they're very good at what they do, and they are because they've got hackers attacking the hackers. And if a hacker can get in, then they fix the holes. And Logbit specifically is on all the operating systems. So it doesn't matter if you've got Macs and so on and Linux machines, they can attack all of them. Their technology works across the field. And it's a double or triple extortion. So what that means is a double extortion is they're going to take data and they're going to sell it. Then they're going to ransomware you. So they're going to make you pay to get the decryption keys. And then they're going to use the data that's stolen to go after your suppliers and the individuals in the environment and so on. So that's the triple extortion they use. And even if you do pay them to get the keys, typically you'll get about 65% of your data back. So they don't give you everything. And they use technologies like Mimikatz. Has anyone ever heard of Mimikatz? Right. Just to give you an idea of how easy it is to hack Active Directory, Mimikatz is open source. It's on GitHub. It's a hacker's tool on GitHub, and it's fine because it's fine if you use it for good, but if you use it for bad, that's why it's allowed to be there. We use it all the time in demonstrations. This is how easy it is to go into Active Directory, run up Mimikatz, and I can have access to your systems pretty quickly. Let's say about 7 minutes. Okay? If I don't have access to technologies like that, if I'm just on your systems, I'll use technologies like Bumblebee loaders, and they will take. If I can get a Bumblebee loader in your environment, it'll take about 22 hours. After 22 hours, I will own your systems. I will own Active Directory, and that means I own everything else. Every database, file store, everything. And surprise, they're based in Russia. They say, their CEO says they're based in the Netherlands, and that's where he's based. They lie. And they also say they're not politically based, but they are because they're sponsored by Russia. So just to give you an idea of who these attackers are or how they do. If you ever want to chat to me afterwards about any specifics or anything, I can talk about that. So what should you do? I talked about it's a single point of failure, and it is because everyone has it right at the top. It's your identity system. Without your identity, nothing in your environment works because everything feeds up into it. So I talked about get visibility of your security posture. Someone I was talking to this morning, I think it was yourself, Gary, was we talked about the simplest things are the way in. I talked about the attack surface. Active Directory is really insecure unless you secure it properly. It's not secure by default at all. And you need to know that attack surface because I don't even need credentials to attack Active Directory. I don't even need a domain join machine. If I walk into this campus and I can have access to the Wi-Fi, I can attack Active Directory straight away. Nothing can stop me. Okay? We have a technology called Purple Knight. It's free. If you're interested, go to purpleknight.com, download it, run it. It will tell you your security posture from an attacker's perspective. It's actually a MITRE attack framework, and it will just tell you. It will give you the low-hanging fruit. It will tell you, you should be looking at this. This is how you fix it. This is why you have to fix it. And this is what's going to happen if you don't fix it. And it's a nice PDF. It comes out. I say it's not a sales thing. It's just there to give you the technology to do it and tackle the answers aggressively. And focus on tier 0. We talk, for those of you who don't know Active Directory or identity systems, tier 0 are the bits that are the admins, the people with control, the golden keys or administrators, basically. We have another technology called Forest Druid, again, free. Look at it and it will tell you how the attacks to tier 0 systems can get in. So a lot of systems will talk about how to attack you from the outside. Okay, you'll hear about pen testing. I like to think of it as a hotel room. If I'm in a hotel room and I'm worried about safety, do I go, I'll just check with all the 8 billion people on this planet and see how they can get to me, okay? And that's how pen testing works. You don't do it that way. You start with the hotel room. Where's my security? It's the door. After the door, it's who has access to that corridor. Is that hotel staff? How do people get in? Have they been vetted? All that kind of stuff. So you work outwards, eventually get into the hotel exit, and then you work out from there. And that's what that technology does, Forest Druid. It tells you from the inside and then starts telling you out. And at the end of the day, I kind of said when that slide came up with the you've been encrypted, I'm not worried about it because it's an end user problem. Right? They're going to tell you, of course, and it takes your business down. But if your identity store can survive an attack on your environment, you've got a good chance of recovering your business, whatever it might be. If you lose your identity store, and it's what they're going to go for, if you lose it, you've lost everything. Doesn't matter how many database backups you've got, it doesn't matter anymore. If they can get access to your identity store, they've got your business. They'll do what they want, and there's nothing you can do at that point. You are in recovery mode. You have to recover your whole systems. And that, as I said, is super complex. So have an identity-specific cybersecurity backup solution that will handle malware-free recovery. Because if I come in, I'm going to put a CNC service on your machines, right? CNC service is command and control. What it means is it'll sit there dormant. You won't notice it. Your antivirus won't see it. But when I hit the kill switch on the internet, it goes active and it encrypts all your machines, okay? Same thing with your Active Directory servers. If you back up, you're backing up the CNC service. And when you recover, you've just recovered it. It'll just reactivate and your whole new environment just goes down like you did before. So make sure any technologies that you use for your identity store is malware-free recovery and has forensics around because they got in. So looking at how they got in and what they did to your Active Directory, because they made changes to Active Directory. You need to make sure you can uncover what they did and stop them getting back in. And then finally, test your disaster recovery often. If you're a larger organization, that includes communication paths to CEOs, your marketing team, because the biggest thing that will tell you if you're going to survive this in the public's eye is your media messaging. I've seen companies that have brilliant media messaging when they get hit, and I've seen companies that have really bad. So the Royal Mail, for example, really bad. Everyone hated the Royal Mail afterwards because their media messaging was so bad. But other companies, try the one going back a bit, top of my head, Maersk. I don't know if anyone even knows who they are, but brilliant media messaging. They came out and said, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, this is how we control it, and so on. And they survived that. Cost them $350 million, but they did. T-Mobile in the US, worst media messaging ever. They've been hit 8 times since 2018. 3 times in the last year. They just, again, in August this year, lost 37 million accounts with personally identifiable information. Their marketing is really bad. Also, their communication plan was, because they got hit with 500 million in penalties, but who's counting, right? So that was it. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. That's what I did in my 15 minutes. Hopefully, that's got some questions going for you. Ask me in the panel or ask me later afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And as he hinted, and I reminded you earlier, please keep a record of your questions, write them down, make a mental note. If there are questions that you triggered as a result of that presentation, we want to cover them at the end. So for our next presentation, I'm going to invite Rizwan to the stage. So Rizwan's one of our own lecturers in resilience. So Rizwan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction, and David for this interesting talk. And also welcome and good evening, everyone. And thank you also those who are joining online. So my, first of all, research interest is in cybersecurity and data privacy. And in this specific talk, I'm going to talk about a few bits about cybersecurity and studies we have conducted recently. along with connections to cyber resilience, which is also one of the recent interests I have developed. So let's start with something we use almost every day. So we do web browsing, and there is a padlock, which is a sign, which means we have established a secure channel. And when we say secure channel, so there are certain characteristics. So the two characteristics we are interested in are confidentiality and integrity. So in cybersecurity, we know like CIA, Triad. So it's not does not offer availability, but these are the two which are offered by secure browsing. And specifically, we can see the sign HTTPS, which is a combination of both HTTP running over SSL or TLS. So it's not only HTTP protocol. We have also so many other applications. For instance, if you have a Gmail app, we have Facebook or any other app. So behind the scene, in order to establish a secure channel, they also use SSL or TLS. And also bunch of protocols, they use also SSL or TLS. The examples are whenever we check or send any email, SMTP protocol, or any file transfer, which is related to FTP. So we have a secure version of SMTP as well as FTP running over SSL and TLS. And now if this is something that can enable us to establish a secure channel, and now the question is, how many sites are using HTTPS or using SSL or TLS? So in order to understand this, we conducted a study over a long period of time, so more than 5 years, starting from 2015 until late 2020. And we found that, and for this one, we also picked up a data set, and this is Alexa top 1 million domains. And we wanted to know how many sites are switching from HTTP to HTTPS so that we know that like they are secure. And what we found was back in 2015, only less than 10% they were using SSL, whereas by late 2020, we found more than 70% were using SSL and TLS. So we can say top Alexa domains are switching from HTTP to HTTPS, which is a good sign. But the real question is, are they secure if they use SSL or TLS? And in order to also understand this, whether they are really secure, so we also wanted to study what are the different types of attacks since inception of SSL and TLS. So that was developed in early 90s. And there are so many attacks, so we are not going to list down all those attacks. We just selected few of them. So back from 1993 to 2016, so we can see so many ones, and some of them are linear cryptanalysis, Beast, Crime, Heartbleed, which is also very famous ones, Poodle, Freak, Logjam, and many others. So all these attacks, so basically these are applicable to, in some cases, all the protocols, and in other cases, they are basically exploiting certain protocols. Like in this case, it's only TLS version 1, and in OpenSSL version 1.0.1, and so on. So also, if we see which specific cipher suite they are applicable to, so it also varies. Some of them are applicable to all, whereas other are having certain specifications. And the level of severity varies from low to high, so there are also some medium. And there are certain remarks. So in order to see all the details, I'm also sharing a link to the published work, which you can see at the end. And it is very natural to also understand, okay, which country has most of the vulnerable websites. And for this study, we conducted, the reference point is if the domain has been registered with a certain country, so we assume it's belonging to that specific country. So in this case, US is on top. And also David mentioned whether UK is on second or on fourth. I think in this case, it's right, it's fourth. And it's not on second. And here, of course, US is on top in terms of absolute number. So we sorted this by number of vulnerable sites among Alexa top 1 million sites. But also, if we see in terms of number of sites and number of vulnerable sites, the relationship and percentage, still US is on top. And we also want to check whether individually with different key attacks, how many sites are vulnerable among that specific data set, and also whether they are vulnerable to one of these attacks or more of these attacks. And So after conducting this, we also wanted to know what's a dominant category which we can see in those vulnerable sites. So we found that business is one of the key ones, but business is not the only one. So we also noticed the other categories are technology, online shopping, education. So of course, education is one of the sectors which was affected by these vulnerabilities, financial services, and also government website. But the key one is 16.2% of business domains, they are vulnerable to these problems, or a small subset of SSL and TLS vulnerabilities. Okay, all right. So basically, we also want to know, okay, if that is the case, if so many businesses are vulnerable to these problems, are they fixing these problems? And this is where we also managed to get some information. So we conducted this specific study in 2018, and we also found some reference to the previous research works. And for instance, in case of drone attack, we found that there was a study in 2016 that reported 15% of these Alexa domains are vulnerable to a drone attack. But in 2018, we found that was down to 0.1% only. So meaning websites are applying the patches. Likewise, if we see also freak attack, which was 8.5% in 2015, so it was only 0.1% in 2018. Likewise, we can see logjam from 8.4% in 2015 to 0.09% in 2018. And the very famous one, Poodle, so back in 2014, so nearly 97% were vulnerable, and then it was lower than 2% in 2018. For the other RC4 and crime, so we couldn't find any previous study, and by the time we conducted this experiment, we found 1% RC4 attack, and crime was only 0.01% in those Alexa 1 million sites. Okay, so this is good news. So many of the domains are patching regularly. So it does not mean this is where we need to stop. So let me now introduce you to another aspect which is related to availability. So last year, I joined University of Surrey. I came from New Zealand. And back in late August 2020, New Zealand Stock Exchange, they faced a series of DDoS attacks. And as a cybersecurity expert, so what do you think? What could be your strategy to defend against these DDoS attacks? Of course, we have many options, and I can discuss like these options. The very first one, we can double computational power. So we can serve more requests, or we can increase the bandwidth if that is one of the problems. We can use content delivery network, or CDN services in short, block source IP address permanently, and fifth, block traffic originated from overseas and only accept connections from New Zealand. Of course, these are a bunch of choices, and if all choices are given, so maybe we want to go for all of them. So what do you think? What could be the most suitable one you would like to choose? C, yeah, so very good. So C is one of them, and also linking back to the previous talk, so it's also single point of failure because we are only relying on content delivery network. So this means if CDN is down, all the businesses might be down. But that's not the case, because in case of CDN providers, they are not only having few nodes, they are having nodes dispersed globally, and they have so many nodes, even some of them are down. The strategy is other nodes, they can serve the request. Okay, now if this is the case, if CDN can provide a certain protection against DDoS attack, so now we want to study whether how many of Alexa top million domains they are using CDN services. So we found that 14.3% of top domains CDN services, and on top it's Cloudflare. Again, in one sense, it's a single point of failure. If Cloudflare is down somehow, most of the businesses might be down. But then we also have Amazon Web Service on second and Akamai on third. We also wanted to see what are the top different domains, as we have seen in terms of vulnerabilities. So what are the famous domains, top 10 domains? So we can see business, news, shopping, we have education, finance. So all of them, they are using CDN services. In some sense, it's good news. But at the same time, the question is, what if CDN nodes are also vulnerable? And this is where we have countries' priorities, and UK's economic priorities for digital economy is to build a resilient digital economy. So they have National Cyber Strategy 2020, which introduces a new key pillar called cyber resilience, and there is funding for 2.6 billion over next 3 years. And there is also this National Resilience Framework 2022, introduced in December last year. And I would say this is very ambitious goal because I will connect to some of these pieces. But before that, the question is, we have seen confidentiality, integrity, availability from CDN perspective, but what is cyber resilience? So cyber resilience is kind of organizational critical infrastructure, communication networks, and IT system to prepare for, absorbing, recover from, and adapt to cyber attacks that affect business continuity and essential operations. So cyber resilience is different from cybersecurity in many respects. So cybersecurity is the first layer of protection, and if that is bypassed, then we have cyber resilience that should be triggered. And it's more like a risk-informed rather than threat-led approach to protect digital assets. So to give an example of like cyber resilience from real life, I think there was this COVID, and most of the countries, they had different strategy. So New Zealand decided to close the border. So this is one of the strategies which is more like cybersecurity, whereas resilience is those countries who didn't close the border. They wanted to open, and they wanted to make sure at some point citizens, they must be building some immunity and resistance to this virus. So that is kind of the notion of resilience. So we want to make sure, we want to have protection in the first place, but at the same time, we have to be prepared for what if something goes wrong and the security controls are not effective, what we have to do and how we have to deal with in order to recover from that disaster. So I would also like to point out a National Infrastructure Commission report in 2020 that suggests a proactive approach needed to make infrastructure resilient. And this report also says that we have to have standards for cyber resilience that must be developed. And this is not one-off step. These must also be updated because it's more like evolutionary process. And this, the same report says we have to fix known vulnerability as soon as possible. Whereas if I consult Cyber Security Strategy 2022 to 2030, it says all well-known vulnerability must be fixed by 2030. So I think that's a funny bit. At the same time, there is no mention of like when we are going to have adaptation phase, when the organizations are going to implement rest of the phases. So basically, all this means is by 2030, we are going to have some kind of anticipation and resistance, and there is no clue about absorb, recover, and adapt. So from like all these perspectives, I think the key challenges the government should be addressing, or the actions government and organizations they should be taking, is there should be introduction and maintenance of cyber resilience standards by the government, and they should be regulating like cyber resilience like Data Protection Act 2018 or GDPR. So where there are clear specifications and the strategy must be there, instead of resilience framework where it says that if infrastructure is down, organization can be penalized, but they don't see whether they have already a capacity to implement cyber resilience. We also have to reconsider outsourcing. And here I would like to take an analogy from construction industry, where the building is constructed and there is a clear plan in case of emergency, if something goes wrong, what have to be done. Whereas for IT or sourcing or software outsourcing, what we are doing is we are outsourcing everything to the third party, and we have no clue what will happen in case of emergency, in case of like something bad happens. And even worse, we don't have any standard in terms of cyber resilience. I think this is where we need to have more like cyber resilience maturity models before we consider outsourcing. And last but not least, we have to develop cyber resilience skills, knowledge, and habits, mindfulness, or broadly speaking, leadership and culture. And lastly, I would also like to point out some research directions. So we should be developing AI for developing cyber resilience strategies. And to this end, I'm supervising one student from University of Auckland who is working on what's a minimal changes in traffic patterns such that we can bypass network-based intrusion detection systems. Also, we need to understand quantification of cyber resilience. For instance, if there are two organizations, can we say which one is more cyber resilient? And do we have some quantification metrics to do that? And also cyber resilience by design approaches. It's not only about redundancy, it's more than that. It's basically, it could be rate limiting or could be more sophisticated approaches where we have maybe a resilient piece of software or resilient architecture. And also it's interesting to see visualization of cyber resilience, whether it's in the context of network-based intrusion detection system where we have visualization of the attack or visualization of the protection. So can we visualize cyber resilience? And also developing cyber resilience body of knowledge. And last but not least, cyber resilience is something very evolving. So can we have some sustainable like aspect of cyber resilience and a minimal toolkit that we can share with the businesses in order to have certain protection. So these are some references, some of the works we have published and some in submission. And thank you so much. If you have any question, we can take those questions during the session, or later on you can ask, or you can also email me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizwan. Hold those questions, keep them in your minds, keep them written down. We'll capture them at the end. And for the people who are participating online, do feel free to ask questions in the Q&A in the chat of the Zoom session, and we'll come to those at the end of the when we go into Q&A. So next up is Caroline from PA Consulting. So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you, Rizwan, for moving it a bit more in my direction. It's going to be a slightly different talk because I'm not a cyber expert. I'm going to talk to you today about sort of national resilience, so some of the concepts that Rizwan was mentioning in terms of kind of broader resilience. I'm going to touch on, and I'm also going to talk about how we use data and digital, so you can tell me how we need to protect ourselves for national resilience. So my name's Caroline Field. I'm a professor of structural and infrastructural resilience at Loughborough University. So I'm actually a structural engineer, and I got into kind of resilience by protecting infrastructure from earthquakes, bomb blasts, all that kind of stuff, and then broadened that into kind of thinking about whole system resilience, so resilience of people, processes, physical assets, kind of how they work in society, kind of at city level, within an organization. So that's really been my area. And being an engineer, I like measuring things. So measuring resilience gets me very excited, and you'll see some kind of system stuff. So hopefully it'll be a little bit different presentation, but hopefully of interest and something that we can kind of discuss after. So as we mentioned, we've experienced the last 5 years. We are living in this increasingly VUCA, volatile, uncertain and complex environment. So the kind of volatility of we've got supply chain disruption, we've had the pandemic, we've got climate change. All these kind of things have really exposed us in terms of our lack of preparedness for these types of events, and they're kind of happening more and more. And so I think we really do need a change of stance. And so we've been very reactive in the past, so very much reacting to emergencies, so thinking about response and recovery, but not really thinking about preparedness in the round. So Rizwan touched on the National Resilience Strategy, which I'll talk about in a moment. Just to kind of reiterate what resilience is, because it does mean different things to different people. Take a very broad view, very similar to your definition, I'm glad to say. So it's that capability to prepare for disruption. It's the ability to adapt in a tiny amount, important to be able to adapt to, because there's things we don't know about. And then the ability to thrive in that changing environment. So it's very comprehensive. So it's thinking about, so we do usually take a risk-based approach to this in terms of the things we do know about, but equally we have to also take a system-based approach in terms of being able to adapt to changing circumstances, because we don't understand everything. There's a lot of uncertainty and change going on that we also need to adapt to. And if you're doing resilience well, it's actually, it will create that kind of thriving environment. You can show that actually it leads to competitive advantage if you're able to adapt quickly. And so just to sort of reiterate on this here in terms of the pieces of resilience, as Rizwan's kind of sort of started to talk about, it's not just about responding or recovering. It's certainly about, you know, being able to sort of anticipate, kind of look ahead, look at that kind of what are the things that might be coming at me? What are those trends? What are the potential threats on the horizon that we need to be thinking about? What can we do to prevent that? What can we do to mitigate? What can we do to kind of prepare ourselves if that doesn't work, to kind of respond, recover quickly, and then to learn and hopefully transform, which means bouncing forward. So when these things happen, we learn from it and we go back to a different position. If you think about COVID, that kind of caused us all to be able to work at home, so that hybrid working, so that's kind of that sort of accelerated hybrid working, and now so kind of transforming to a different normal where we do that as opposed to going back to kind of where we were. And that's always the opportunity when we kind of go through these types of events. It tends to be a catalyst for change and advancement, or it should be. So the government's resilience framework, so to make the UK the most resilient nation, whatever that means. So improving the ability to anticipate, prepare, prevent, prepare, respond to and recover from risks. And so they kind of have founded this on 3 key principles. So the first one being about having this shared understanding of the risks that we face, so very much kind of focus on their national risk register, which they've now shared, and being able to kind of engage people around this. And I think the drawback on this is that people don't really understand risk very well. And so people's risk perception and things they should be worrying about is not always kind of something they're really that aware of. The middle one is really interesting around this whole society approach to resilience. And this is about kind of thinking about it, putting it to sort of community level, societal level. So thinking about joining up communities, so the good voluntary work that goes on in communities with the work that the local resilience forums do in terms of responding to emergencies, linking up with businesses, linking up with local authorities, so that it's a whole kind of system endeavor. So that's the kind of change in stance from very much a sort of emergency response focus to a building societal resilience focus. And then the last one, which I was really pleased to see, prevention rather than cure. So kind of moving away from that reactive kind of stance to being proactive in terms of building resilience into our national kind of infrastructure and systems. And that will obviously include cyber systems. So everything I say is applicable to cyber, but we tend to think broadly about all those critical systems when we're thinking about national resilience or organizational resilience. And then they've got a number of kind of themes that they've picked up on around sort of risk and decision making, around kind of looking at how accountability for resilience works in the UK. And so they've appointed a UK resilience director, Mary Jones, and then they're looking at appointing chief resilience officers for each local resilience forum around the country to kind of lead that resilience building, which is great, really good. And they're trialing that at the moment. And then they want to kind of foster more partnerships, kind of look at standards for resilience, which I get quite involved with. And then kind of, models for investment. How do we invest in resilience? And then lastly, we touched on that earlier, the kind of skills for resilience, really important in terms of making sure we're training people in this kind of broader societal resilience and getting those professionals ready for the future. So kind of fundamental to delivering resilience is essentially the ability to enhance your situational awareness. So kind of being aware around you. So we use kind of data and digital technology to kind of do that. And so I like to kind of put it into insight, foresight and hindsight. So not necessarily in that order, but I'm going to present it in that order. So insight being kind of gathering that kind of data now to know kind of what's going on around us, what are those issues I need to deal with. And so having that information so that that evidence so you can make good decisions, that's kind of fundamental to resilience. Foresight, so being able to kind of look ahead and project and predict and kind of using technology, machine learning to help us do that. And then hindsight, kind of learning from what's just happened, using that data to kind of make improvements to the system. So kind of the learning piece. And so that's kind of really fundamental to kind of how we use data and information technology for resilience. I will just say I'm not a technology person. I think I said that at the beginning. I'm a broader person, but what I'm really interested in at the moment is digital twins, and so this is kind of quite a buzzword at the moment. And so at PA we do a lot of in the technology space, and so we've been kind of looking at digital twins in terms of, and I've been really interested in how we use that for national resilience. And so there are different kind of stages. You can have like a digital twin, which is kind of more just about somewhere to capture information. And then you can have kind of different levels in terms of its ability to kind of assess the current states in terms of maybe do an analysis or a simulation of different risks. And then we can start sort of using it to predict, and then ultimately linking it with real-time data. So thinking about, I've been talking to our folks around quantum computing and using that to kind of harness, to be able to do optimization on kind of system performance, and then AI to kind of learn, for example, when we responded to a certain incident, how long does that take us? What's the optimum way of doing that? If something happens, how should we recover this system? So kind of having that actually be able to then kind of learn and advise us on the best course of action. So we talked about measurement earlier, and this is one of my favorite areas. And so we use kind of information and obviously technology, digital, to kind of understand those risks within the systems and vulnerabilities, and be able to kind of measure resilience. So measuring it to me is really key, because the clients I work with will say, well, why should I invest in resilience? What's in it for me? That's just going to cost me money. And being able to show the business case to say, well, actually, it's not. It's going to save you money, because if these are the things that are likely to happen, and if those happen, that's actually going to impact your business in this way, this way, and this way, reputation, financial, social, societal. This will affect your, So it's being able to quantify the impact, but also the benefits, because when you actually put resilience in systems, it's actually usually a benefit now. And so being able to quantify, so for example, if you're doing it at national level, we tend to, so if, for example, I'm going to tackle, say, a flood defence, so flooding, if that's the thing we're addressing, which we do in the UK, obviously, if we build a flood defence, it doesn't necessarily have to be grey, made of concrete. It can be green, made of a nice patch of green land, which can also be a nice park. And so you have a benefit now, and you have a benefit when it floods, because that absorbs the water, for example. So thinking about benefits now when we're designing for resilience. And so this is like my favorite thing when we start thinking about systems. And you can certainly think about this for whether it's a digital system or whether it's a organization. This is actually an airport system. And so this is thinking about, well, how does this airport work? It's kind of all of these functions that kind of get the person into the airport, through the airport to their destination. And there are a number of functions that have to happen. Where are the critical functions within that system? So that single point, those single points of failure, where are they? How does the system deliver value? So let's link it to what the business cares about. And so that we can start and say, so the size of those bubbles indicates the importance of those functions. We've got people, we've got processes, we've got assets, we've got utilities that all kind of factor in. And then we can overlay with, well, what are the sort of risks and stresses that this system would see? And so the colour here is looking at and measuring the resilience of those to those different shocks and stresses, and being able to understand where the gaps are, being able to test that system for different scenarios and understand what would happen, what would be the loss, what would be the benefit. And so really being able to quantify is kind of, this is the type of work that we're doing at the moment in terms of being able to show clients this is the benefit. We also look at, obviously, particularly during emergencies, being able to coordinate and communicate, really, really important. And so we did some work during COVID on for DLUHC, Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, which gather all that data from those local resilience forums around kind of pandemic, kind of numbers of people affected, number of kind of vaccinations, so kind of trying to get all that data together so that government had situational awareness of kind of what was going on around the country. So those types of dashboards really helpful. But obviously during an emergency, being able to also communicate what's going on and being able to have that awareness, which you're sharing. I mean, resilience to me is all about coordination and collaboration. You lose resilience at silos, and we all like to work in silos, but basically in order to be resilient, we need to be able to join up those dots between systems and between organizations. And that's also thinking about, I mean, I think I talked about ecosystems, so thinking about not just necessarily your organization, but who am I reliant upon, and kind of how resilient are they, because that is kind of where it's gonna bite you, is where you have that vulnerability. Predicting performance, and so we're kind of using it to kind of be able to predict failures now. And so we've got a tool we put together which looks at energy systems and predicting, kind of looking at kind of maintenance and predicting what the likely failures are, so we can kind of do this predictive maintenance on systems. We've also used that type of technology to kind of look at the NHS in terms of efficiencies around kind of bed usage and kind of waiting lists, trying to drive down waiting lists by predicting what's going to be needed. So that, you know, we're really kind of using those to kind of enhance our designs. And then learning and improving. So I mentioned potentially using, so we're looking at using quantum computing and machine learning to be able to kind of learn from our experience of different, so say during the pandemic, what did we do to respond? And so it to kind of learn and be able to then talk about how we can optimize and improve for the future. And then obviously you're all experts in this, but obviously, you know, the more we're connected and the more we're reliant on these types of digital technologies, the more we're potentially exposing ourselves to threats. So that's always my kind of warning of making sure that you understand your system and its exposure to cyber threats. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have, particularly around national resilience at the moment, is sharing of data. So in order for us to understand the resilience of our national infrastructure, for example, we need data from all those different providers. We need to understand, you know, what those systems are, where those vulnerabilities are, what the risk is to them. That's obviously very sensitive, and it's also data that they're not compelled to share. So sharing of data is going to be really critical for us to be able to kind of manage resilience on this scale. And so we're talking actually with this firm called Iotics at the moment, who are kind of working on data meshes that can kind of bring that data together. Or draw on data as opposed to bring it into one place. So these are kind of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Reminding you, if you need reminding, to keep those questions in your head and save them for the last session. So our last speaker, Gary, invite you to the stage.
Thank you.
And hand over to you.
So good afternoon, everybody. Some great speeches have been coming along, and hopefully a lot of what I say will start to wrap all that up into one, because actually we're all speaking very, very similar language. So BlueVoyant, we're a full-service cybersecurity firm, managed detection response, supply chain risk, all sorts of different bits and pieces. I come from, I'm one of the directors, I'm within professional services in the UK team, which is based in Holborn, and we look at governance, risk and compliance, but on the other side of it, I come from the digital forensics and incident response team. So it's me or it's my team that get called out when there is a cyber attack or a ransomware attack or a data breach or a bad lever or something along those lines. We will come in and do those investigations. For my background, I was 18 years in the Metropolitan Police at Scotland Yard as a detective and an investigator. 8 years of that, I was involved in internal investigations and anti-corruption. So police shootings, deaths in custody, and then I moved over to the covert side of the world. So all the sexy stuff with long lenses, bugging cars, following corrupt police officers around. So I did that for quite a while, and then I moved into the high-tech crime unit in the professional standards team. So we were the ones that would seize the mobile phones, the computers, and do the forensic investigations on corrupt officers and those who corrupt the police. My particular role was internal network investigations. So any information leakage from the Met Police network or any misuse of that corporate network was down to me to do those investigations around insider threats and all that kind of stuff. So I left in 2013, set up my own business doing exactly the same thing. And for the last 2 years, I've been working with Blue Voyant, initially as Director of Professional Services. But actually what was becoming apparent was that when a client suffered a data breach or a cyber attack, the first 24, 48 hours was spent with everyone running around with their hair on fire, trying to work out what was going on, what was missing, what had been taken, and who knew what was happening. So that's where the incident preparedness bit came along. So it's my job now to work with clients to make sure that they're ready and that we're ready when that attack does happen. Because, and I think something that's come out of this talk is, it's all very well looking at cybersecurity, but actually you need to be looking at resilience because you are going to get hit. You cannot be 100% secure. So it will happen at some point. Now, you've got to have the cybersecurity in place, but actually what you need is the ability to recover more quickly than you can possibly imagine, because it's the recovery and it's the time it takes to recover. That's what's going to keep you alive in business. It's not having, ultimate security with all singing whistles and bells and all this kind of stuff. It's how quickly you get back earning money. That's what it's all about. So that's cyber resilience for me. Now, I'm going to cover off. I'm going to cover a scenario, which was it's a real life scenario. It happened earlier this year. It's not the real name, City Club, a private members organisation full of extremely high net worth individuals and high profile individuals based in London. They hold tons and tons of data, really sensitive data on their clients, medical records, food choices, photographs, financial details, the whole shebang. So they've got absolutely everything. Now the incident, and this is real, there was a night security guard, and you can imagine this, he's sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning, playing on his work computer in his security office, and he decides to download some software or download a video from a dodgy sharing site. So that's the first thing, don't use dodgy web sharing sites. So he's downloaded a video, and within that video, there has been a malicious payload. Once he's downloaded, he started playing the film, the payload has exploded, and it started traversing across the network. So that's the incident. When we talk about City Club systems, they were looking at going to the cloud and moving from on-site infrastructure, but they delayed it, and they keep delaying things. But they delayed it for various reasons, because they either didn't have the resources, they didn't have the money, they didn't think it was important enough. So essentially, they didn't upgrade, they didn't move to the cloud. But because they had those plans in place to do so, they stopped maintaining their existing systems. So they stopped doing the updates, systems went out of service, they weren't supported any longer, they couldn't do patching, and so on and so forth. And that's what's happened. Now, they tried to mitigate some of those risks, so they had tried to implement some things, but it was quite a complicated and disorganized network, so it was very, very difficult to do so. It was also, and these the first few takeaways from this, it was a very flat network. There were few internal firewalls, there was no segregation in place, and this is a common theme. I think probably the last 5 investigations that Blue Voyant have investigated, a flat network was a common angle in these attacks, because what it means is once the malware is there, it gets to go across the entire network without anything in place stopping it from its journey. Because they hadn't upgraded, they hadn't patched, they also couldn't roll out multi-factor authentication or 2FA. That's one of the other takeaways. If you don't do anything, put 2FA in place, please, because it's one of the biggest things that will stop an attack from happening. So that's their system. So that sets the outline. So the attack, as I say, the security guard downloaded the software or downloaded the video. He clicked play, and the malicious software is allowed to deploy, and it starts moving across the network. It also pings back to the attackers, so they know that it's happening. The attackers have then used stolen credentials on the dark web, and they've compromised an account with elevator permissions. They've, as I say, they've gone across the Active Directory, which we were talking about earlier. They found the domain controller, and that's enabled them to carry on the further attack. They found some file shares, which they then stole, or they stole the data. They stole just under 30 gigabytes of data. Membership, finance, and HR. That's what they were after. And then they deployed Lockbit, and they encrypted the systems. So, and this wasn't planned. So all of their virtual machines were encrypted. No one knew it was happening until about 6 hours later, when the first team came in the morning to set up for the new day. That's when they realized. So that's what happened. Actually, they still didn't fix anything after we investigated for them, and they got hit again about 2 months ago. So it comes back to resilience, making sure, plug the gaps, because it will happen again. It's a bit like, I guess, the analogy I would say is you've got 5 houses along the road, 4 of them have got a burglar alarm box on the wall. Which house is the house that's going to get hit by the burglar? It's the one without the box. Yeah, it's about removing that low-hanging fruit, making things harder for people to go after. Okay. Now, the threat actor, they were a Russian threat actor. You won't be surprised. They announced on their web blog that they were going to be releasing data, and they charged a ransom of just under $700,000 US for that information. City Club took advice. Well, they had to report it because under the GDPR rules and et cetera, so that's what their stakeholders, their clients who are victims, and the entire world. And they followed NCSE guidelines, and they didn't pay the ransom. That's another argument. I've worked with other clients who have paid the ransom and got the data back, but it's very much down to whether you've got the ability to recover and whether it's worth taking the risk, paying the ransom or not. They were fined because they obviously had inadequate measures, and they've suffered a huge hit on their reputation. Actually, and this comes back to something Caroline was saying, it's not necessarily the data breach or the cyber attack that kills the business. It's how you communicate it. It's having that ability to manage the message, to make sure it's clear, and I think you mentioned it as well, is it? It's about having that proper communications message, because it is going to happen. So plan out the messaging first, so that it happens at 3 o'clock in the morning or 5:30 on a Friday afternoon, which I guarantee it will happen. You've got the ability to pull your ransomware playbook out of your folders or open it up on another computer, and you can start following the action plan. And you're not running around panicking at the last minute. So that's the case study. There's a number of things in that I'll now show you how I would advise, and the other speakers in this room would probably agree in what we need to do. So my analogy for this is the iceberg. You only see what is 10% of the iceberg sticking out of the water. The rest of it, 90%, is under the sea. You can't see it. Now, let's imagine the wind's going one way, you've got the current going the other way. The wind is going to have no impact on your iceberg at all in the direction it travels. It's going to be the current. Imagine that with your organization and how you deal with cyber threats and cyber resilience. If you want to protect your sensitive data and you want to avoid disruption and you want to protect your reputation, you've actually got to go a lot deeper. You can't focus on that top 10% that you can see sticking above the water. You have to go deep. And you have to go from the lessons learned. So business email compromise, ransomware, which is huge, supply chain attack. You could have all the protections and defenses in the world. If your supply chain are rubbish, they're the ones that get hit, okay? It's not you. They will get in through your supply chain, through your company that hasn't invested the money, the time and the resources to fix the cybersecurity issue. They'll come in through that back door. That's what you need to do to protect yourself and to increase your resilience. So, some key principles that have been established from all the work that we've done in the past. Know what you've got, build an asset list. So identify your hardware, your software, and on that list make sure that you identify when that software goes out of service date, whether it's still in support. Actually what you've got, just know about it and make sure you've got your patching up to date. and your firmware and all that kind of stuff. Know where your data is. This is actually a requirement under the GDPR. Do a data mapping exercise. Work out where your data is coming from, where it's going to, where it sits, who's got access to it. Map it all out. Very similar to that last slide that you were looking at with around resilience. You need to know what we're talking about. The other reason behind that is if you have a data breach and it involves personally identifiable information and you're put before the ICO and they take you to court and all that kind of stuff, they're going to say, right, tell us what data is missing, tell us what systems you had in place to protect that data, tell us where it's gone and what the impact is. If you don't know where your data is, how can you answer those questions to the ICO? The fines will be bigger. The impact on your business will be bigger. So do the data mapping. Your key customers, key stakeholders. Actually, this is related to the data mapping point. Know who your key customers and stakeholders are, because when it all goes horribly wrong, and at some point it will, you need to be telling them within 72 hours that it's all gone wrong. And they will ask the same questions. What data was taken? What data has been compromised? What are you doing to preserve my data and the reputation? Again, same with business locations. And this kind of comes back to that third-party risk as well. You might be in one building, but if you're in 5 buildings, where is the incident happening? How did it happen? Where is it coming in? Is it spreading? You need to know the structure of your organization. You need to know where your data sits within that organization as well. So it's about knowing business locations. And if you are using a third-party supply chain, where are they operating from? Where is the data center? We're all in the cloud now, but where is the cloud? You need to know. Having a cyber incident response plan. This is a high-level planning document that identifies who's in your crisis management team, what the call tree is, so who gets called out at what times. It's how do you classify what an incident is? Is it critical? Is it important? Is it something you can shrug off? That's what's in your cyber incident response plan. So it identifies what the impact is on your organization and dictates what actions you take. You need to have that because, again, 5:30 on Friday, when someone's gone off on maternity leave or someone's not very well, you're going to have to be able to pick up that cyber incident response plan, anyone who's in a position of responsibility in the organization, and start running with it. You can't necessarily guarantee that you've got the right people in the right place at the right time. That's resilience. Linked to that incident response plan, we have a number of playbooks that we put together for our clients. So ransomware, data breach, phishing, loss of key systems, loss of key personnel, insider risk. What happens if your key person walks under a bus tomorrow? It's that kind of thing. Or someone else goes off on sick or maternity, or they've got a family issue at home. I guarantee it'll be on a Friday afternoon at exactly the same time the ransomware attack happens. Okay, so you need to know all that. Know who's on call, who's in the management team, who's in the extended team. So you're going to have an incident response team, and you're going to have an incident management team operating a gold. If you imagine from coming back from my police days, you've got gold, silver, and bronze. So gold is strategic. That's the executive suite. You've got the silver, who are departmental leads, people who can direct resources and so on and so forth. And then you've got the bronze, the people in the IT team, for example, doing the actual work. So gold, silver, bronze, that all needs to be mapped out. And then your extended team, that may well be Blue Voyant or your company or any other company who you call out to respond to a cyber attack. You cannot do it all yourself. You have to start outsourcing and looking responsibly at how you're going to manage the risk and manage that threat. Actually, that extended team may also include risk crisis management companies, reputational management companies, because, as I said, one of the biggest things is you can deal with a data breach, but it's how you deal with the messaging afterwards. It's how you manage that message. It's how you manage the message that goes out to the wider public. And it's things like, and I think you mentioned it, Carolyn, it's when you have a crisis response, and Maersk, I think, did it very well. It was Norsk Hydro. They had a very good example of responding to a cyber incident. They set out a bunch of calls. So very much on a clock face. At 6 o'clock in the morning, they had a team meeting and they worked out what was going on. They announced to the press that they were having a press meeting at 9 o'clock. What happened in between is the press didn't make up any stories because they were waiting for the organisation to feed them the message. Then when you have the 9 o'clock meeting, you schedule in another 12 o'clock call with your team, and then another media call 3 hours later. What you're doing through all that is you are managing the message. You're not allowing anyone else, the bloggers or the trolls or anyone else, to fill the space, because they know when you're going to make the next statement and they will respond to it. So that's your extended team. Crisis management plan, just covered that. And then lastly, and I think we've all touched on this, is rehearse and test. One of the biggest things is, and it's a common saying, is no plan survives the first battle. The thing is, we can write a crisis management plan, we can write your playbooks, but until it happens and someone's working through it, you cannot guarantee it's going to work in every case for every organisation. So it's about planning and it's about testing that plan. Doesn't have to be extravagant. It could be a tabletop exercise once every 3 months or something like that, along those lines. But you need to bring everyone into a room and you need to run through some scenarios and just find out what's going on. And it's not a pass or fail, it's a learning exercise so that no one feels ashamed or uncomfortable. It's about learning how to deal with those crises. And then lastly, a lot of organisations, a lot of people ask me about, oh, shall we do ISO 27001 and all this kind of stuff? Actually, you know what? 27001, it's great to have, but it's very policy heavy. It's very difficult to obtain. It's cumbersome to keep. I'd start off with Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, because it's the nuts and bolts. And if you become Cyber Essentials certified, you're reducing your risk by something like 80% of an external attack. It's a really baseline level, but it's a really, really useful framework to follow. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Some really solid advice there. I recommend that you take that last slide and pin it to your foreheads when you're thinking about cyber resilience. So now we're going to have a Q&A session. I'm conscious that we're running slightly late, so my intention is to run 15 minutes thereabouts before we go to our networking session. So I'd like to invite the panel back up to the stage. If we can move the chairs forward slightly so that we're on camera, because we are linked. And can we have the lights up so that the cameras can see us? And then we'll go to questions on the floor and to our online companions. I will bring a microphone to you because you'll need to speak into the microphone so our online companions can hear the question. We'll also pass the mics. We haven't got quite enough mics to go around, so there will be a bit of juggling going on there. And I'm going to cheat because I've got a whole list of questions that we could go all night. I wanted to ask a question actually on the theme of resilience, and there are a lot of different touch points on this. And I kind of wanted to take us away from purely cybersecurity and ask the question about what, in your experience, you think of your collective experience between you. I'm guessing it's over 100 years between the four of you. What makes an organization truly resilient? And I'm thinking, okay, you've got digital attacks, you've got changes in the economy, you've got the pandemic, you've got technology like AI, which is causing shocks to the economy, to companies and so on. And companies having to, organizations, not just companies, government organizations, third sector, universities, you name it, all having to respond to these shocks and changes. When you stand back and think about it, you think of organizations that have responded really well to those kind of challenges. What are the characteristics that you would look to say that's what made them resilient? Caroline, go first.
So I was like desperate there. This is a whole nother presentation. Is that on, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We talk about. Well, I often talk about sort of 6 essentials for kind of organisational resilience, and that touches on essentially resilient people, like resilient workforce, and having resilient leaders within that workforce. So you've got to have your own personal resilience and be able to lead for resilience as well. So that's kind of one piece. Having the sort of situational awareness, so kind of being aware. And we talk a lot about adaptive capacity, and I mentioned that earlier. So being able to kind of be adaptive, so have the robustness of the kind of processes to deal with kind of risk and kind of mitigation, so kind of be an update, but also be adaptable so that for change, because if you're too rigid, you're losing that adaptive capacity, which allows you to move quickly. So it's kind of getting that balance that depends on your business. So there's two things there. Three, being able to measure resilience, like I talked about, so you quantify the benefit, understand where the gaps are, and fill those gaps. 4, stress testing, so being able to stress test. 5, understanding your ecosystem, your supply chain, and then 6, that ability to kind of learn and improve, and I'm sure as well, culture. So developing that resilient culture within the organisation. So we're doing a lot of work around culture and people aspect and how you embed resilience within the organisation. And in terms of the kind of, you were talking a bit about threats as well, the top issues for organisations at the moment are, I would say, workforce resilience and supply chain resilience. So workforce in terms of just having the skills you need, but also well-being on the back of kind of COVID and what have you.
Thanks. I'm really glad you mentioned that workforce, because I think the human dimension to resilience is so important and often gets glossed over when we're thinking about that. I'll turn to the others. Gary?
I very much agree. I think it's people, process, and knowledge. You've got to have the right people in place, and they need to be multi-skilled. You can't compartmentalize people anymore. They need to be able to double skill and to do different things, because that's the only way you can have a resilient organisation. The process, you've got to be testing these things. You've got to have a plan in place, because it's no good trying to make it on the fly. You will get past it, and I know many organisations that do struggle on, but it is a struggle. And the thing is, and I can't remember what the figures are, but there's an awful lot of figures out there that say an organisation will fail 6 months after it's had a big data breach. A lot of that is because they didn't have the plans and structure in place. And then lastly, it's knowledge. So it's knowing exactly what your ecosystem looks like within the organisation, so that, and it comes back to kind of data mapping and all that kind of stuff. Is know where your crown jewels are, know what you've got to protect, and that's where the resilience comes in.
And one area I'm fascinated with there, and perhaps we can talk about afterwards, but when you're thinking about process, what's the process for coping with generative AI, the impact that that's had on organizations? You don't have to answer that, but it's kind of the shocks question, and you don't always have the process in place.
No.
And then what's left?
And that comes back to the people.
Exactly. I think
Always comes back to people.
Yeah. So hold that thought. Rizwan, David?
I think I agree with both of the speakers. So also adding on top of that, so having some concrete plan in place, be ready for when some unexpected situation happens, instead of having no plan at all and then running into cyber attacks and creating maybe more issues instead of solving some of them. And coming back to the other thing, generative AI. So I think we have been investigating also what's a minimal number of changes in the attack traffic such that we can bypass network-based intrusion detection systems. So we were quite fascinated by the fact that there are so many ways, and it looks like okay traffic, but the NIDS is not able to detect. So I think that's one of the threats we have. And in order to solve the challenges, we don't have any general purpose solutions. Of course, we can come up with the moving target defense techniques where we have randomization, diversity, or redundancy or duplications. But those solutions can achieve a certain level of protection, but we don't have any general purpose solutions which can solve the problem.
Thank you. David, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll follow that one. Thank you. I was thinking back to some companies that I've worked for and seen in the field, and agility comes to mind as probably my biggest answer to that, because I was working with one company and the pandemic came along, and the ability to react to that and the fact that everyone had to work from home, it took them 18 months before they even started saying, oh, you can work from home and you can have a computer and all this kind of thing. It's like, pandemic was nearly over. And then they were just kind of like, it took them so long, it caused them so many problems. Those businesses really suffered. And the larger the company, I think, the harder it is to be agile. You see lots of startup companies are very agile. When you hear about companies, we've got a startup culture. They haven't. As soon as policies start coming in place, it starts to really slow them down. And it's agility to look at something that says, this is going to happen, and the ability for senior management to turn around and go, yeah, we can react to that, we can do something, and we will make change.
Interesting. Right. Now I'm going to open to the floor for questions. Anyone got a burning question? Raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
If you could introduce yourself as well as the question.
Yeah, sure. My name is Vishal. I work in a financial organization. My question is not about where I work, but more about what is the remit of the government of an oversight on IT resiliency, especially in terms of at what point does the government direct the company that you have to do this, or at what point the government says that you do what you want? Because I was listening to Gary's comment about City Club, right? City Club got hacked. I mean, that would not be the government's interest. I mean, it is between a customer of City Club and City Club having some problems with their data. But maybe if water supplier shut down because of some problem. So what is the government's oversight to this in general? Thank you.
I can start if you want. Well, so there's a number of levers, and we've been talking about this actually with the government and various sort of regulators. So obviously regulation and regulators can put requirements in terms of resilience. So we've seen that in some of the critical sector. The FCA has probably the most forward-thinking requirements in terms of resilience, so what's required for financial systems. Water a few years ago introduced the concept of resilience in the round and asked their providers to kind of show that as part of their price review. We're talking to energy, so we're trying to sort of influence. So essentially, there's a requirement if you're a critical national infrastructure provider to meet the resilience requirements from the
NIS regulations, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And
The GSG.
it's gone out of my head anyway.
Is it the GSG?
No, it's not the GSG. Anyway, I'll come back to it in a minute. So there are requirements to kind of, but it's more around kind of responding and sharing some information. So what they need to do is broaden that. And so we're having conversations about, well, what should regulators be asked to do? And then, for example, if you're going to contract with the government, should they put resilience requirements into kind of that procurement process like they're doing with things like social value or sustainability? And so I think there are a number of kind of incentives, carrots and sticks that kind of need to be used to incentivize national resilience, because it has to be across the board. It has to be for organizations, it has to be for critical questions. So we all have to do something. So I think that's still open for still an open debate, but essentially using standards and regulation, I think we're going to see kind of introduction of more requirements around resilience.
No, I'd agree. And I think there's a common thing that, the government should be answerable for everything. I don't agree with that. I think let the government concentrate on critical national infrastructure and legislate for that, or put regulations in place, just as you said, and then you've got the NIS regulations and all this kind of stuff. Let them concentrate on the really important things that we need as a country to do. But then when it comes to my private members club, for example, I think then you've then got to rely on legislation such as GDPR, Data Protection Act, that kind of stuff, because the government's bad enough at running things anyway. So let's keep them out as much as possible and allow the law to take precedence over that and force companies or organisations to follow the law. And I think that's where it should stay, because it's going to be too much otherwise to expect government to take over.
I think that's a good point. And civil contingencies, that was what I was trying to get to. Yeah, I like your point about kind of, you don't want government dictating everything. It kind of needs to be everybody's issue. Everybody needs to let in and do what they need to do. So I think, like I say, you don't want that big stick, the government telling you everything. It's more like, having that guidance and kind of empowering people to make the right decisions and have that kind of knowledge of what might happen and what they need to do.
I think it's a bit like if you put IT in charge of cybersecurity, it becomes an IT thing and everyone ignores it. Cybersecurity has to be a business risk problem, because that's the only way you're going to get proper controls in place. And I think that's exactly how we need to go. Don't put government in charge of everything. Push it out to the wider communities to make it a community-wide thing.
We have to recognise that governments are very poor at responding to advances in technology. You think that we're talking about this problem now, well, the internet's been around for 30 years. They're just about getting through the online harms bill after 5 years of arguing about it against an industry that was invented 20 years ago in social media. So the government expectations of government to be able to respond to this fast. You'll be sorely disappointed. So I think actually making it everyone's problem is exactly the right.
Well, that's this whole society resilience kind of approach, is to basically put it down to that lowest level. So asking communities, well, what is it that you need, as opposed to telling them what they need. And so I think this sort of thing between, I think providing them information so they understand kind of what broader risks are, but I think you'll find that people in communities are more, in need of certain other things that are related to things like cost of living and kind of, how I'm getting to across the city or whatever. There are other things that are also needed, and I think those need to be addressed.
And that became very clear in the pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Local level. David Rusman, any additional thoughts on this? Sorry about the shared microphone.
Yeah, I think my perspective on letting government to have GDPR-like compliance for cyber resilience is, so we can see in most of the countries, including UK, more than 90% SMEs are businesses are SMEs. And leaving them vulnerable to these cyber resilience issues is not the ideal option. So instead, there must be some action from the government. Otherwise, if we don't have any compliance, don't have any regulation, what will happen? Businesses, they will say, okay, we have this business and we want to make sure we run the business and we don't care about security or resilience. By having that regulation, at least in the first place, we are making sure that they protect themselves in a longer run. Otherwise, if organization is under attack, so maybe the business is down for a long time and it's not in line with building a resilient digital economy.
I always remember an MD of a small company I bumped into that said, what you've got to remember as an SME is my IT department is me on a Sunday afternoon. And that's the truth. The actual technical capabilities, skills capabilities, so even if you put the regulation in place, doesn't necessarily mean the company's got the skills to do anything about it. And that's the reality we have to deal with. David.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. That's exactly how schools are as well, and education is just somebody who decided to do that bit. They don't understand it. They don't have the skill set of people who are actually in the industry. But I think there has to be a core set, a framework that says this is, so it's different for infrastructure, critical infrastructure, that's got to be controlled. But for businesses, I think it has to be more along the lines of, if things happen, you are going to be held accountable. And then you have to explain why you didn't do it. And because the government will always be behind the curve, even with some of the frameworks that are coming out now, they don't account for how the world has moved on. I see universities have to go through certain security frameworks that don't account for bring your own device. Because they say, well, you have to have this on your endpoint devices. Well, if you bring your own device, that's not going to work because you don't have control over it. So they very often fail that way because they're very generic. But I think they should be, but it should be about if and when things go wrong, having accountability to say, why did this happen and how are you going to resolve that? And again, kind of sharing that information to other organizations to say, this is what we're doing, or this is what happened, and this is what we did.
I think a lot of larger organisations should be helping smaller organisations in terms of best practice. And so I think having those sort of forums where you kind of get together, I'm a member of Resilience First, which is like a kind of a network of business organisations, and they kind of put out some guidance for small business and that type of thing. I think that's absolutely the type of sort of thing we should be doing.
And dare I put in a plug for our partners, SASIC, who with 8,000 or 9,000 members, whatever it is now formed exactly to do that. Katie, I'm going to come to you because I want to ask a question of someone online. We are running out of time.
So is our resilience on technology reducing our national resilience? Is our resilience on technology reducing our national resilience?
I would interpret it.
It could do, couldn't it?
Yeah.
So I think, I was trying to highlight that we just really need to be aware when we are over-reliant on technology. I think you can use technology to give you more information, but the problem becomes if that technology is taken away or if the electricity is taken off, can you still function and serve your purpose? And if you can't, then there's a problem. And so I think being aware of over-reliance or not being able to do things manually that we used to be able to do, which we've now relied on technology to do. I think with increasing use of AI and automation, there's a potential loss of us being able to do things manually ourselves as opposed to, and so I think we just need to be really conscious of those decisions and the change in kind of our skill sets to be able to kind of survive without them.
I think you need to talk to my kids because they couldn't survive without the internet.
We were having a conversation earlier on about automation, and I have a very automated home. Everything is automated. When I go online, I have lights that come on, studio lights, blinds that comes down, on-air lights that come on around the house, controls around my house. I have 56 automated devices in my house. Right? So I am very much into that, and I rely on that because I just say things, and when it doesn't work, or when Alexa doesn't understand me, I'm like, I don't know where the button is to physically go and do what I want it to do.
Do you know where the light switches are?
Yeah, but it's true. If I had to get a light switch, I'd actually have to unplug Alexa to plug the plug back in. And then I was saying that I've got friends who, in Texas, a guy, he has a printer. That's all the IT he's got, and a gun next to it. And if it makes the wrong noise, it gets shot. Right? That's his reliance on IT. And we said there's a happy medium in that. For example, I don't have my mocks connected to anything like that. So there is a happy medium, and you can end up having too much reliance. Yeah, I don't know what to do if the power went out.
No, it's using it to enhance, but not overly relying on it. So it's, I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would say these days, as Gary mentioned, so what if there is no power or internet, and asking kids, surely they will say this is a basic need, and without them they can't survive. Yeah.
That's what nobody planned for nobody expected the pandemic, and yet organizations had to cope, didn't they? Even though, right, I'm conscious that we're over time, and I did promise to finish by 1:45. So I'm sure there are lots of questions. We will be having a networking event next door. So there will be drinks and nibbles so that you can continue this conversation. Please do ask the panel and make those 5 new friends that is the SASIC credo. So thank you very much for attending today, for braving the rainy weather, for attending this session. I hope you found it useful. The next one, I think, is in January. We haven't announced the title for that, but we will do shortly. Thanks to our partners in SASIC and to University. I've been Andrew Ogoński hosting you. Thank you, the panel, and join us next door for drinks.
It's fine on steps for those who want to do it.
career development